Frankie,
Ian,
what up, man?
what's up with you handsome, handsome, handsome SOB?
Oh, man, we look good. We look good. Even before the filters, we looked good
There's
today.
no doubt. There's no doubt.
My
Today's a
goodness.
special day, Ian. It's a special day.
This day has been a long time in the making. I mean, a long time in the making. I'm pretty fired up about it.
Today's the day I wanted to do a podcast. It's like for episodes like this.
For episodes like this, that's right. We might even retire. This is going to be so good. I have a feeling that we are going to reach the mountaintop of podcasts so early in our career that we're like one-hit wonders. We can't make more podcasts after. Everything's going to feel like a downer.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good. If you are listening right now, this is a gem that you will cherish for the rest of your life.
There is no doubt. And both of our mothers will probably be the only people that listen.
Yes. So today we are talking about lessons you can learn in business from The Godfather. As an Italian American yourself, I know how much this movie means to you, and it's a movie that you and I often quote and talk about in our own business dealings and conversations. So we have painstakingly ripped through every scene of this movie on multiple occasions to pull out as much business content as possible. But I think the best way to start this is, as an Italian, I want to just let you take the floor with what this movie means to the Cava family.
So Ian and I were talking about this, and I was like, I'm wearing a suit. He's like, a suit? I'm gonna wear a t-shirt. I'm like, nah, we're wearing suits. Like, when Ian and I went to the annual meeting for Berkshire Hathaway together for the first time, we both wore suits, and everyone made fun of us because we clearly looked like we didn't belong. But like, that's how serious this is. Like,
Respect.
Ian, I got on my gold chain. I put on my gold chain. I haven't worn it since high school. I got on my big tie, and I'm the grandson I'm a great grandson of Italian immigrants. My grandparents, my dad's parents, big Italian family, 6 kids. My granddad and my grandmother were both, together. They had like 15 siblings. This movie came about in the 70s when my dad was in his mid-teens. And like, this was a source of pride. So we would all get together at Christmas. I moved away, so we would go home at Christmas every year and see my grandparents. And like, literally, I've seen this movie hundreds of times. Every Christmas from probably middle school through college, we would all get together in my grandmother's back room. We turn it on. And someone would come in, we'd hear a car pull up the driveway. We'd stop the movie. We'd wait for him to pull up. It's like, hey, it's Uncle Chris. We'd all give Uncle Chris a hug. Uncle Chris would go get something off the stove. He'd go, oh, what scene's on? He'd sit down with us and we'd start watching it again. So this movie is like in the fabric of my family.
I love it. At its core, the business aspects aside, at its core, it's an American story of an immigrant, really. That's at the core. And then the book written by Mario Puzo, I read the book before I really got into the movie, which is interesting. The book is really Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 put together, 2 different stories, or at least most of it. But it's a story of Don Corleone, who is an immigrant to America that kind of pulls himself up from his bootstraps. And it's a little bit of the generation, how a business can be born and can fall apart without succession planning, and fascinating all the different themes that go through both of the movies from the book into business, and could literally do a 6-hour podcast on all the different business aspects that you can pull out. I think when Frank and I went through all the different scenes, for me, one of the most powerful scenes of this movie that I've always thought of, and I've talked about the scene often with managers, with people in their career in general, is the opening scene. And the opening scene is when you get to know the Don, who he is. He's in his office on the day of his daughter's wedding, and the Godfather can never decline a request on the day of his daughter's wedding, which is a weird rule. I didn't quite understand that.
I love all the stereotypes they get away with in this movie. Like, you could never make this movie like this today. Like, because you're Sicilian, you're more calm. Like, all the shit they can pull off in this movie is incredible. Like, no Sicilian can deny a reasonable request on their daughter's wedding day. Like, that statement, it's so riddled with ability to wiggle out. It's insane.
100%. The movie starts with a funeral parlor owner, an Italian, coming to talk to the Don, and his daughter has got in with the wrong crowd, and this crowd abused her, and he wants retribution from the Don. He tried the police kind of blew him off. And so the movie starts with him asking for a favor. And in essence, he's asking the Godfather to go have these boys killed. And the way the Don handles it, the way he calmly listens, the way he presents himself to this business owner, it sets the tone for the whole movie on how the Don operates his business. And even though I guess we can start with the caveat in this, that this is a movie and, you know, we don't condone killing people and all of the violence and the mafia, but you could translate the Don's business to if he sold tech devices or if he was in the computer programming business. It all kind of works the same. So let's just take that caveat out that we don't condone all this violence that is done. But in essence, the Don tells everyone in that it's like the inciting scene of the movie, and it's right out of the gate, which is very unusual in a movie, the way he operates, which is, I will do you a favor, and someday I may call on you for a favor myself. And it really, to me, it encompasses. So in essence, the Don says, look, I'm not going to kill these boys, but I'll rough them up for you a little bit. But what's in it for me? Are we friends? And the guy says, absolutely. And in this world, you have to kiss the Don's ring if that's the case. But once he says, I'm going to rough these boys up for you and take care of this business, that just means that this funeral parlor owner owes him a favor one day and he can't turn it down, right? And to me, this is how networks are built. Networks, and the Don is, throughout the movie, they talk about it. You know, you've got the judges, you've got the police, you've got congressmen in your pocket, right?
All those little policemen and congressmen that you hold so neatly in your pocket.
He's got them all in his pocket. And the reason he's got them all in the pocket is because he's done them all favors. He's done things, and the book goes into detail on how he gets all of those judges, and because they all have things that they've done wrong that the Don has made go away, and it makes them all loyal to them. But to me, in business, networks are all about building a network is not about going to a network function and collecting a business card. The way to build a network is to do something nice for someone, to help them, to fix something for somebody, to show some kind of value. And the thing that I would say is different in the business world than with Don Corleone, who is very transparent, that I only do favors knowing that I'm going to come back and ask you to do something. In business, you can't really have that mentality of I'm only helpful because I expect you to help me back. People that do that, normally it's obvious and people don't want to hang around them. But in business, I've found personally that the more I just give without expecting anything, the more people tend to give back, and it makes me more productive.
On the giving side, right? He gives, and he knows that he gives you something, you're going to get something back. And that's the trade. Benjamin Franklin had a quote, and it's like, if you ever want someone to do you a second favor, get him to do you a first favor. That is the brokerage with which he had. And that's what sets him apart from other gangsters, is instead of stealing money from the people, he protected the people. It's why he had such a fiercely loyal following to him. What I want to kind of go back to is I want to unpack that first scene. One of the first things you see in this dark room, which we're kind of mimicking here, people dressed up really well, which we're trying to mimic here, is someone saying, I believe in America. I believe in America is something that my great-grandparents felt when they moved here. I believe in America was a big push 20 years ago when all these other companies, if it said made in America on it, that was a big deal. It was a renaissance of how important being made in America was. The biggest business investor, one of Ian and I's business heroes, Warren Buffett, always bets on America. He believes in America. So is it perfect? No. We're in a messy election, right? Is it perfect? Hell no. Is it better than anything else out there? Yeah. Is the spirit, is what people do here when they get here something that is special? Is take the dysfunction, take all of it and put it together, and it's the best system there is. It's the best system for business. It grows. And that was what I thought was so cool about that scene of I Believe in America. It goes further than that. That's kind of the first thing and the first hurdle in the movie. You're like, wow, that is a real business parallel.
And in the Don, in the scene, gives this business owner a little bit of a tongue lashing. When he does it in a very calm and pleasant way. But his comment to him is, all these years you've never visited me, you've never stopped by, your wife's never come by to talk to my wife, you call yourself a friend, and yet the only time you've ever been in my house is now on the day of my daughter's wedding asking for a favor. He kind of dresses him down a little bit, and he had every right to say no at that point. And so the other lesson on this networking thing is, if you don't put the effort in to network and to help people on the day that you need help, you can't expect people to care. You can't. That's right. If you didn't care first, the Don had every right to say, get out of here. You're a loser. You don't even like me. You don't even talk to me unless you're desperate when it comes in. And I think it's powerful on both sides.
Very much so. And the other thing is too, you realize this now, he's a Don, he's in the underworld, but he's not lazy. And other characters in this movie are lazy, but he is not lazy. And what he does is he says this: if you would come to me and show me respect, these people will be suffering right now. He tells him, like, this is what could be, but it isn't this way because of you. And any good manager doesn't pussyfoot around things. They get to it and they tell you what it is. And that's what the Don did in that scene, which I love. There's something else, Ian, I want to talk about here. Home court advantage. Home court advantage in business is real. You're coming to the Don and you're asking for something. Every single person except for his godson, who sits on his desk and ultimately gets slapped, follows a protocol. There is a protocol. Everyone sits in a certain way. Everyone stands in a certain way. Everyone asks in a certain way. And you are coming and asking for a service. And because you're asking for that service, you're expected to do certain things and act certain ways. In business, most businesses Z and I are in at least, someone doesn't end up at the back end of a gun. But there is a protocol. You're going to go to your boss for a raise. You're going to go talk to anybody inside of an organization. You need to know who you're dealing with. Who's the Don? Who's that person? Who's a person you can give a service to? You can go out of your way and do something where it may have repercussions years down the road that you don't even know what those look like. That stuff is real. Ian and I have experienced that in business, and it's absolutely something that it's not just the movies.
When you talk about protocol also, in every meeting that the Don is in, there's a certain respect given to him. There's even people that want to wipe him out, show him respect when they're around him. And you find that's kind of the same in business. If you're in a boardroom, the highest ranking person usually speaks last. They listen, right? If they're good at their job, they're not doing all the talking. They listen. If you watch the Don in almost every scene, he'll lead it with a quick thing, and then he'll ask for everyone to kind of share. That happens early in the movie. That happens when he talks to Sollozzo about the drug business. That happens when he brings the 5 families together. The Don will usually kick it off, listen, and then he has something to say at the end. And that's protocol kind of works in business. It's the CEO, the owner, the highest ranking person in the room normally does the least talking, but there is a certain respect afforded to them. And especially in groups, you want to show respect to the Don of the room, typically.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is interesting too is almost always when you think of movies, you think of like sparks flying, you think of like big moments, big heroics, like things like this. The Don undresses people and makes world-changing moves in a very low tone. He's unemotional. He's smart. He's calculated. And you're going to see later, Sonny gets killed, right? If you haven't seen the movie, it's 48 years old at this point. Like, we're sorry for the spoiler. But Sonny gets killed because he's emotional. The best managers and business owners that Ian and I both know are calculated. They are strategists. They think ahead. They're always 2 or 3 moves ahead. They never react in a way that is emotional. They can have emotion, but they don't make earth-shattering decisions based upon emotion. They do it with calculated moves and conferring on other people who are empowered to lead, to give decisions and help. And that's what you see in that first scene.
So the next point we're going to talk about is the Don's ability to delegate. And I think the thing that I take away from it is not so much that the Don is willing to delegate, a guy that controls as much territory as the Don does, someone with a business as big as his, he has no choice but to delegate. What I take away from this is how careful he is and who he chooses to delegate to. And his consigliere, which is pretty much his number two, it's kind of like a COO of the mafia, is Tom Waltz. And Tom, every time someone comes to him with a request, something's going on, Tom will say, who do you want me to give this to? And there's always a reason behind it. There's much more detail even in the book of how the Don thinks about how to delegate, but he is very, very careful about who he puts on certain tasks, knowing their personalities, knowing their ability to do different things. So in the scene where he, agrees to go rough up the boys, he says, give this one to Clemenza. I want someone reliable and someone who won't get too carried away. And he thinks quite a bit about it. When he wants to get his godson into a movie, he sends his most trusted guy out there because he knows this is a big deal and he wants Waltz to go personally to talk to this guy. And throughout the movie, often there are tasks that are getting spread out throughout, and everyone is very careful about who the person is that will get delegated to. Not just so much are we delegating the task, but who are we giving it to?
Very much so. And one of the things you feel comfort in when you see the Don is that's part of his wise counsel and his sage, right? Is he knows who it is, and that's how he makes problems go away. There are certain conversations that he has that are just great. Like there's another scene where Enzo, the baker, who comes back at a different scene, is standing behind, the baker who made the cake. And he's like, who should we give this to? He knew who not to give it to also. He didn't want to give it to someone in their district. He wanted to give it to someone who wasn't Italian, because if it got something associated with it, he didn't want it to be an Italian, and we were trying to protect an Italian in this scene. So he wanted to go to somebody who wasn't, of the same, ethnically was different. It's one of those things where you get a new manager who rushes or who tries to push things down your throat, where you get the wise old manager who's a little bit slower in decision making, but you can't confuse how methodical they are with anything other than just really brilliance and experience.
There's a scene before Michael is going to an important meeting in a restaurant where they need to drop a gun, and they're going to put a gun in the toilet. And that's where Michael is going to go get the gun because they're going to pat him down when he comes in. And Sonny, his brother, says at that point, we need a good guy on this. I need to make sure there. And he looks at Clemenza, who's kind of a loyal captain.
Before you say that, I don't want my brother coming out of that stall with his dick in his hand.
Yes, that's the line. And one part I love here is so this is delegation to the core. So Sonny actually does a good job of delegating here, looks at someone he trusts, Clemenza. And instead of Sonny picking the person who's going to go do the gun, he goes through the chain of command. He goes to Clemenza. He says, this is just going to be your job. I want someone reliable on this. And Clemenza says the only thing a manager ever wants to hear from someone when they delegate,
it'll be there.
He says, it'll be there. That's it. And that's all. As a manager, as an executive, as a business owner, when you delegate something to someone, what's important is you are specific in what gets done and when it gets done. So Sonny says that gun needs to be there. It needs to be in that restaurant. When Michael walks in to get the gun, it needs to be there. So he doesn't need to say how it needs to get there. He doesn't tell Clemenza, pick this guy, go there at midnight, talk to the restaurant. He doesn't do any of that. He just looks at Clemenza and says it needs to happen. And Clemenza says the only thing you need to say to a manager when it's delegated, I'm on it. It'll be there.
That's it. And something that's so interesting, right? Like when the drug scene comes up with Sollozzo a little bit later, Sollozzo's kind of like a one-off, right? He's got like one trick pony. He wants to sell these drugs. The Don's business is an established business. At this point in the story, this is not a startup. A startup doesn't have the ability to delegate. A business that's established, they're in their third or fourth decade of being in existence, has a Clemenza, has a Tessio. It gives you an ability to outsource and to rely on people. But that wasn't the way it was in the beginning. But that's how you can maintain a good business, is you have people who are in place that you believe in, that you let them go do what they're great at. And in addition to that, you continue to accrue those types of assets that you can delegate to. Because in these type of stories, someone gets whacked. But in real business, if you have a Clemenza who's incredible at doing a job and you don't let him do his job, Sonny wants to handle the gun, Clemenza's going to lead. So in a gangster movie, you get shot. In real life, they go work for your competitor. And that's what delegation is all about.
Clemenza is either going to leave or it's not going to go as well, because Clemenza is one step closer to the action. He knows his guys better than Sonny does. He knows that restaurant very well. He knows how to go get a gun dropped somewhere. Sonny's a few steps removed from it. So for Sonny to come in and tell Clemenza how to get the gun there would be dangerous to his brother. Clemenza is the expert. So you just tell him that gun better be there when my little brother walks.
That's right.
That's all you need to do. And that is delegating. 101 is pick the right person and tell them what needs to happen, but don't tell them how, because theoretically, they should know how better than you. You're very good at managing projects for homes. You're no longer as good as your best guys.
Completely.
So for you to go metal, most of the time you just need to be like, look, I need this to come in at about a 30% margin, figure it out. Like, go get into the details.
I'm not dealing with paint colors and trim and miter boxes and shit like that. What I'm talking about is how does it fit into the whole business? How those things, because I'm not as good as I was back. What I think is interesting too about this, Ian, is this. There are natural leaders and there are force leaders. In my opinion, this scene shows you Sonny is out skiing over his shoes. This is not the territory where he's going to thrive. Sonny is kind of a hothead. He's a good 5th, 6th in command. He's not a good in command. Michael, who had in this moment, he kind of brought the plan up. He had the vision. He is the leader. And even though he was kind of in the shadows at this point before he becomes the focal point, he's like, if Clemenza can come up with a plan, if they could hide something, if there's a thing. And what Sonny does is he drills the point home, but the visionary in this was Michael, person with higher EQ, person with a college education, someone who went into the military and thrived. So what you start to see is what are the critical elements of not just a boss, but a motivational and transcendent leader. And that was the first time you saw Michael as, holy crap, this guy's got what it takes. This guy's the Don after the Don. It isn't Sonny, even though he's a placeholder.
As we kind of move in chronological order of the movie, we're introduced to a fella by the name of Luca Brazi. Is a favorite character of Frank's and mine, even though in the movie he gets very short shrift.
Last weekend, I read the book, the scene about that guy swallowing the towel and dying.
So good.
And my dad has seen this movie hundreds of times. He's never read the book. So as soon as I read that part, I stopped what I was doing. And I called my dad. I'm like, you're never going to believe this. So in the book, this guy, they neuter him in the movie. And that happens. You can't take a 14-hour book and turn it into a 2-hour movie without making some sacrifices. But in the book, what ends up happening is this is like a right-hand man to the Don, and he's a savage, just a savage. And they go into the details of it, but I'll let you kind of go back through the intro.
Yeah. So Luca, we learn about Luca in the book. There's great detail in the book. In the book, Luca Brazi is the only guy who is in his organization that the Don is scared of, because the guy is certifiably nuts. He's a massive 6'6", 300-pound enforcer. That's the mafia. There are plenty of guys that make their name by doing the things that Luca Brazi does. But Brazi, he does the dirty work. And all of the other families are scared to death of Luca Brazi. They know him. In the movie, we learn about Luca Brazi in a negotiation that the Don had. He brought Luca Brazi, and the Don made this person an offer he couldn't refuse. And Michael's girlfriend at the time says, well, what does that mean? He said, well, your signature or your brains on the contract. And Luca Brazi, by him being there, they knew that this wasn't a joke, because Luca Brazi would put your brains on the contract. That's what he does. In the book, the scene that Frank is referring to in the book, actual Al Capone makes his way into the book. So Chicago,
so awesome.
The Chicago gangsters, Capone sends a couple of thugs out to kill Corleone because he's becoming too big. And Luca Brazi intercepts these guys before it can happen, ties them up in some warehouse and hacks one of them to death with an axe in front of the other to get information. But before he can get information, the guy's got a towel in his throat and he's so scared he swallows the towel and kills himself. So really builds up this Luca Brazi character. But I think all the gore and blood and guts, that's sensationalized for a movie. But something I take away from this is, in business, it is so important to have people that are willing to do the dirty work, the cleanup managers, the people that are willing to kind of go do the work that others don't want to grind their way through. I think they're absolutely critical. And especially those that kind of just know their lane, they know what they're good at. Luca Brazi never aspires in the movie or the book to be more than just what he is for the Don, and he appreciates what he has. And I think those kind of people are just critical in business, that know their strengths, know what they're good at. They're paid well for it, but they don't aspire to do anything more. Luca Brazi could not have been a manager or a captain in the organization. That's not what he was good at, but he was really good at intimidating and forcing and ultimately murdering.
In a mob movie, that's what people do. They murder. Also, it's an established organization. This is not a startup. There's levels. There's high level people. There's Tom Hagen, who's the attorney, who's got a great education, who is the whisperer to the Don. But the Don needs muscle. And in every business, muscle maybe isn't it in a business, but what you do need, you need someone who's to make all the crap go away. Someone who's willing to deal with all the bullshit that comes up on a regular basis. Another movie that we could talk about here, which I really love, is Up in the Air. You ever see that movie with George Clooney?
No.
All right. Up in the Air came out in the last recession, like 08, 09, something like that. And everybody on it, like unemployment spikes. The thing like coronavirus spikes, but it spikes. It goes from like 4 or 5% to 13%. Those are huge numbers. Like outside of a Great Depression, those are big numbers. So what George Clooney's character is in this movie is he comes in to fire people. That's all he does. Wimps at businesses don't fire their own people. They send George Clooney in to fire. And these businesses don't have the heart and soul of a mob organization. A mob organization does it themselves. Other organizations, well-run organizations like Ian and I have been a part of, we handle our own problems because we're properly staffed. We have people who do the dirty work. In this movie with Clooney, these businesses didn't have that. And big problems happened in the movie because they had to outsource firing people.
I think one other point on Luca Brazi I find interesting, and I think it's instructive, is Luca Brazi is one of the Don's first employees. When he's a scrappy startup, Luca Brazi and Don form a friendship, and Luca has a very big impact on the Don becoming who the Don is. So the Don is not a murdering butcher, but he understands that part of his business, he has to, when somebody tests him, he has to push back, right? He can't just be nice with Al Capone. He has to show Al Capone how we do it in New York every once in a while. And Luca has a very big role in the Don growing to become the most powerful family on the East Coast. But what's fascinating is the Don goes from a one-person startup, right, that we learn in Godfather 2, when he's his own business, he just goes and does one job. He kills the local guy who's a pain in the ass, to a sprawling organization with thousands of employees. And as he grows, Luca Brazi's role is always the same. Luca is an enforcer when he's a small startup. Luca Brazi, when he is a massive Fortune 500 company, is still an enforcer. And the Don knows that Luca is limited. And just because I'm growing, I'm not going to promote him to a captain. I'm not going to promote him into a bigger job. Sometimes it's okay to just be really good at what you do, and you don't need to get promoted, and you don't need to promote someone. And something I see often that managers make a mistake of is someone's a great sales rep or they're a great project manager. And I'm talking elite,
Great.
double, triple what everyone else is. And because we're growing, let's just take that person and make them a manager, even though they've shown no skills to be a leader, to think strategically, to be able to, broaden out their horizons. But because they were really good at one thing, let's make them a manager. And that typically backfires. That typically goes very badly. The Don was smart enough to know that Luca was really good at one thing, and he paid him incredibly well, but he never promoted him above his bandwidth. He never took him to a different level. He let Luca be Luca.
So I'm going to go into like real life with this, with business. I graduate college. I'm 22. I'm 23 years old. Like shortly thereafter, I moved to Northern Virginia. I go to work for Ryan Holmes. And everybody knew I had an upward trajectory in front of me. No doubt about it. Like I kind of came in with that reputation. I kind of felt it even though they never really told me that. So what did they do? They took me with two salty dogs that have both been in the field building houses collectively for like almost 60 years. Why? Those guys became managers or trainers like another decade later. But at the time, they were just in the throes of building. So they were left in the right jobs because they were incredible at it. And I was a young kid who had the ability to learn immediately from those guys. I can microwave the learning process by learning from these two incredible guys that'll move up past. They don't go into this in the movie, but there's absolutely a way that people like the Clemenzas of the world work under a Brazie or work with him and see what he does, understand what he does. They elevate past him in the organization, but then they know how to call upon him with those skills. And that happens in real life all the time. Like you learn under these guys. And then when you become a higher level manager, you go, I'm going to call Dale Mathews. I'm going to call Dave Zaremski, the two guys who taught me how to build houses. I would say, hey, I'm running into a problem. I'm thinking of it this way. What do you think? I learned under them. I understand their vocabulary. I know exactly what they taught me, but they have a depth of experience and they have a specific craft that is so much deeper than mine. But as you grow, you know who to call back upon and ask that question of. And that's there's both sides of it. You got to leave those people in their roles, but at the same time, as you're moving up through things, build great relationships with those people so they answer the phone when you call, and realize that they're really talented at what they do and to become huge assets.
Love it. And pay them at the absolute top of the market. Like
that's right.
A lot of times people promote someone who's a very good individual contributor because they've reached the top of the band, whatever that might be, right? Some range, some arbitrary range that someone created. And so they promote them to make them more money. And they end up putting them in a job that they don't enjoy and the people under them don't enjoy. I would just say, screw your band. If you have someone that's that elite that anyone would kill to get into their company, pay them like it. Pay them at the top of the market and keep them.
Absolutely.
So the Don, and we've talked about this a little bit, the Don's temperament is one of the things that makes Don Corleone who he is. And you see it throughout the book, and you see it, in Godfather 1 and 2, the young one and the older one. And his temperament, he rarely loses his temper. In Godfather 1, there's really only one scene where he raises his voice. There's only one scene. It's when he's talking to Johnny Fontaine, who's his godson, who's whimpering and whining and generally acting weak around the Godfather, and the Godfather loses it. And
you got to say the line about the brains. I'm going to say it. He smacks him in the face and he goes, "You can act like a man."
Yes. And the only reason I want to bring this up is I've worked for yellers, right? People that yelled all the time. I've played football for coaches who yelled all the time. And I've also worked for people that hardly ever raised their voice, that hardly ever got upset. What I can say is the latter, the one who's calm, measured, thoughtful, when they do raise their voice, when they do get red in the face, when they do get upset, it crushes you because you know that they're normally measured and you know that you've screwed up big time to get them to crack, to lose their temper a bit. It makes a bigger impact on people when you are measured the majority of the time. And when you do lose your cool a little bit, it gets everyone's attention so much more than, the dipshit that's just always yelling and always frustrated and always upset.
Speaking of neutered, Johnny Fontaine gets neutered in the movie. But a fun fact for those of us that are Italians and that are kind of nerds and geeks for this stuff, if you haven't heard this, the Johnny Fontaine character is supposedly built on Frank Sinatra, and there's supposed to be some truth to it. But we talked a second ago in the last segment about Luca Brazi, right? Like he was the guy who was in a role because he was great in that role. The yeller is someone who's in a role. The yeller very rarely ascends up. The asshole very rarely ascends up. The asshole is capped. So if you are, we've used this analogy, Ian and me, a bunch. If you're going to be great in business, you got to have 5 pitches. You got to have all the skills and all the tools, and you need to not be afraid to yell at somebody. If it comes to that, you better do it. But that needs to be something you use very rarely. And I don't know if I've ever yelled at people in my business. I have said, like, I've very bluntly said, I'm pissed for these reasons, and this is why. And I've very quickly made that point. But at the same time, I've been able to get past it and move into something else, because I don't want to be known as an emotional leader who can't be approached. And there's both sides of it. And that was what was so cool about this scene with the Don. He smacks him in the face, gets his attention, but then he immediately makes the decision to send Tom Hagen out to see Waltz. Yep. And that's what Ian's going to talk about next.
Well, and the people that have to yell in business, Frank, typically don't have an answer. So they're frustrated with themselves that they can't get better performance, or they don't know what to do. So it's normally their insecurity.
Yeah.
And so by raising the volume, right? It's like a 2-year-old. I'll just raise the volume until I get what I want.
That's right. It's like I tell my 2-year-old, use your words. Like, if you don't have the vocabulary or the bandwidth to be able to do it, you just yell and scream.
That's it. Side comment. The first 20 minutes of this movie is the Godfather's daughter's wedding at his house. And he spends the majority of her wedding working, thinking about work, talking about work. And whatever you think your work-life balance will be, one thing that I think is consistent in the real world is most wealthy people and successful people that I know kind of are working all the time. They take phone calls on a regular basis at random hours all the time. They pick the phone up when customers call. They are rarely all in business or all in personal. It's a blend. It's kind of always melded in with regular life.
Yes. There's not much to say to that. That's the truth. I live in a nice neighborhood. Ian's visited me. I had some friends in town, some business colleagues in town in the last couple of days. And someone walked out and was kind of overhearing a conversation that we were having. And I literally used this quote because I had it in the notes. I'm like, rich people never stop working. It's the truth. If you're in a startup situation and your revenue isn't where you want it to be, take a pause. And I remember doing that. When my business was very small and very quiet, I remember not making the money I wanted or having the staff or what I wanted yet. But I remember thinking, I'm probably going to be at a point in my future where I'd want to trade some of the money or some of the things that I have for the peace I have right now. And you have to understand what season you're in your business. And if you're in one of those seasons where you're allowed to use your brain and you're allowed to have some of that time, it might not be that way forever. So take advantage of it.
Love it. So now that Johnny Fontaine has been chastised and kicked out of the office, it's time for the Godfather to go to work and help him get the movie role that he really wants. So he sends his number 2. He sends Tom out to Hollywood to meet with Waltz. And Waltz is a big time executive movie director, producer, rich, beyond most people's means, but probably not on the level of the Godfather when it comes to power, but a very powerful man in himself. And a couple of things with Waltz that I want to unpack with you, Frank, and I think this theme comes up. People in this movie who lose their temper, it ends poorly for all of them. The best negotiators throughout the entire movie, whether it's Corleone, Michael, Tom Waltz is a great negotiator. Sollozzo is a good negotiator. You rarely hear them turn the volume up. They're calm, they're patient, and they let you start flipping your cards over and showing you their hand. And Tom Waltz is one of the first situations where you see this, where he is an awful poker player as a negotiator. He shows you his cards very quickly. He's pugnacious. He's loud. He's arrogant. And he tells you, he's very transparent. He tells you exactly why he's doing certain things, to the point of he just undresses himself when you have to negotiate with him.
So Waltz owns the studio, and the guy's name is Tom Hagen, who's the adopted son, who is the consigliere and attorney for the family. So Waltz the studio executive is working, and Tom Hagen shows up right on set. And Tom Hagen walks up to him and he starts to broach the subject. And right out of there, Waltz goes, "I don't care how many Goombas come out of the woodwork." What does Waltz say back, Ian?
"I'm German Irish."
Yeah, so Hagen is like, "I'm German Irish." And then Waltz says to him, he goes, "Well, my Kraut Mick friend." Which is just
one of my top 3 favorite lines of the movie. You know, it's an amazing, when he yells that at him, it's hilarious.
It's insane. So Waltz is old school. He's establishment. He's arrogant. He's egocentric. He's gotten to the top of the heap, and he's been at the top of the heap for a very long time. And because of all of those things, one of the things that Ian and I saw in him is a huge ego. Huge. He's emotional and he's egocentric. Where do you want to go? Do you want to go ego first and emotions later?
So on the ego, so Tom Waltz is out there asking him to reconsider, to put Johnny Fontaine in the movie. And we don't know why he's not doing it at this point. And again, this is where Waltz starts to show all of his cards. But what it comes down to is Johnny Fontaine had stolen a girlfriend away from him at some point. And the line that Waltz says, which shows his ego and really what this is all about, is, "He made me look ridiculous, and a man in my position cannot afford to be made to look ridiculous." And that's it. He's not thinking about who he's dealing with. He's not thinking about how dangerous it is to get into an argument with the mafia. He's not thinking about next steps along here. His ego is so focused on how he appears to the world that everything else has just been blotted out. It's just all become noise to him, because all he cares about is his image, which is it's perfect that he's in Hollywood, that's the way it's setting up, because Hollywood is kind of it's the rest of the business world on steroids about ego and appearance. But it also is how a lot of managers and businesses make decisions. I'm no stranger to it. I've been myself, but every decision you make, you're thinking about, if this works, if it doesn't work, how am I going to look within the organization? If someone comes to me and asks for a raise and I have to go talk to my boss about that raise, how's that going to look? Does it look like I'm soft on pushing back on policies? How am I going to appear? Everyone does this within business. And the only way to really work with people within a business is to think about their ego, because it's always there. Some people just are worse at hiding it.
What the Don teaches us in the first scene is that timing is everything. He's going to show you that you're going to ask me for something today and I'm going to do it. And at some point in the future, because I did this for you now, you're going to do something else for me later. And that is a big part of life. When you're new into a business or you're new in your career, you're picking up chips and you're stacking chips. And if you're smart, you're also life leaves clues. And you're picking up on these clues and things that you start to see. I was in a company for about 6 years, been promoted a handful of times, half dozen times, and I'm sitting there interviewing for a vice president's position. I might have just turned 30. I was 29 or 30, a young position to be in. I was across the desk with someone with an ego. A big ego. And I kept feeding stories about how great that person was. And they were helping me kind of answer the interview. And I knew, because I had been collecting chips for 6 years, this is how to win this interview. It was a calculated move. Waltz doesn't do that. Tom Hagen does. Tom Hagen, the attorney who's smart, who literally just tips his hat and does things like this. What he sees is an emotional person that they can exploit because of how he flies off the handle, and how when he flies off the handle, he's no longer intelligent or brilliant, which he must be to get where he got. So those are things that you can start to see. Ian and I were talking about like how to prepare for and capitalize in negotiations. And when you work with an egomaniac, you can out-negotiate them because of the fact that you can play into their ego, just like Hagen did to Waltz.
So I got a fun story for you on this, because you know the person as well. So when I started at NVR, NVR Mortgage, we didn't have annual meetings to give trophies to people. We didn't recognize things, but Ryan Homes, our sister business, absolutely did. And they did it in different local places. And so I noticed that right away. And I'm like, that's really nice that they do that. We should do that with our people. You know, I had a big region at the time, couple hundred people. And I told a few people I'm thinking of doing it. And they were like, oh no, you're not going to do that. And I'm like, why? And they're like, oh, Bill would never spend the money. He doesn't believe in annual meetings. Six are stupid. And I'm like, well, you know, we can change some of that. And they're like, no, I'm just telling you, they're not gonna. And Bill, I love him to death, founder of our company, huge ego. I mean, just a big, big, big personality. And so I booked the hotel room. I didn't ask him, booked the hotel room. I ordered all the trophies. I scheduled the date. And I went to Bill and I said, hey, Bill, I got a great opportunity. I think our people would love it. Will you kick off my annual meeting and give a presentation? You have no idea how much it would mean to everyone for the founder to talk about your vision. And I really played it up of how the whole meeting was about Bill. I'm like, you know, times are kind of tough and it would be good to hear someone who's been through some recessions and some downturns to just tell everyone it's going to be okay. They would love it. I didn't go ask for permission. And he was like, what meeting? Like, you started to get mad. I'm like, oh, just annual meeting, kind of like Ryan Holmes does. But I think this one's going to be more important because you're going to be kicking it off. Like they don't have a president kicking it off like you. He was like, what day? Not only did he agree to come to my meeting, which I never asked him approval for, he just assumed it was already kind of done. So that was part of the ego too, is I just assumed that he gave me control. Like, why would he ever say no to something like that? So he didn't even say like, why didn't you come to me? Because it would have been embarrassing to his ego, so we just assumed we were both doing it. But not only did he agree to come present, he asked where the venue was. And then we switched it to his country club so that we could do it in his room in his meeting. And every year from that day on, I would come to him and be like, hey, what's your number again at Westwood, his country club? And I did it at his country club every year from then on. And he was all about it and he loved it. And I would get people to send me emails after to say how much they enjoyed the president's speech. And I would share it with him. And I was the only regional for 5 years under Bill Inman that ever did an annual meeting. No one else did one. No one did it because they had no idea how to work that man's ego. And I did, and it worked.
Life is a symphony, and you got to play the symphony. One of the things that Ian and I were talking about a couple of days ago is how do people play us? And when you have an ego, you don't think you ever get played. We know we're getting played somehow too, but that's all part of it, right? It's also fun for someone else to manipulate you in a way where they can get into a win and tell their friends, I got my boss to agree to this, which I didn't think he was going to do. So that's part of the cool thing about business is you get to take shots. You get to do things like this. Like if Inman was pissed and he canceled the meeting, it would have been embarrassing and it would have been slightly painful, but you wouldn't have ended up with a bullet in your head. It could have gone negatively, but it wouldn't have ended with death. In addition to that, if you play it right, it could be incredibly fun and it could be something that sparks an incredible relationship. And there's two things of it. There's kind of positioning, but there's also sales. And we don't really talk in here about sales, but that's what it is. Playing into an ego, playing into getting what it is that you want. It's selling. It's having a vision. It's figuring out how to bring it to term. And the Don had done that for decades. And what he was selling was protection. And all these other characters who ultimately win have a product to sell. And that's why they ultimately win.
Yep.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.